And a good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the slightly odd start to the stream there, but we are underway now. Just under 5 minutes ago in qualifying, and we are here at Istanbul for round 2 of the Swarbrick.com Formula Alpha Championship for 2024. We're on board at the moment with Steve Knight in that rather striking pink liveried car there, as he runs down into turn 1 on this historic racing track. Now, as I say, just over, not just under 5 minutes ago in qualifying now. Steve Knight currently running a 132.3 ahead of Colin Knief. Hasn't been able to set a competitive lap yet in this session, but I suspect we'll have one coming from him sooner or later with so few laps to go in this session. In this session, it is Andy Craker who leads at the moment, still in the black liveried car there. It's a 125.2. He's a 2/10 ahead of his nearest rival, not only in this session, but in the championship as well, of course. Alex Smith, the car we're on board with here, is currently our championship leader. 2 fantastic races in the first round, a fortnight ago at Barcelona. See him with 2 victories to his name and 50 points as well. So very much clear of the rest of the pack at this point in time. Of course, we're only early in the season now. It can be all changed later on. Andy Craker with 28 points is actually being followed rather closely by Matt Daly, as a bit of an oversteer kicking in on Alex Smith's car by the looks of things. They did very well to catch that. Will Inglis is currently in the slipstream of who is that in the yellow car. Still learning the liveries, of course. Let's see. That is actually... is it Matt Daly? No, it's not. It is Barry Clayton. That is Barry Clayton's car there that Will Inglis is following here at Istanbul Park. One of those great historic F1 venues. Of course, we visited there a couple of times, actually, post and in the midst of the COVID pandemic. But unfortunately, no plans for that on the calendar at any point in time, I believe, which is a great shame. It's a fantastic track, so bumpy. As you can see there, heading down that start, finish straight as Will Inglis gets ahead of Barry Clayton there. The track is not forgiving, and there is Will Inglis abandoning this run in qualifying, as we can see every driver on the C5 tyre, apart from Steve Knight there. So not sure what he's planning in this session. Maybe he's forgotten to change the compound. He's running quite a hard tyre compound there. Could expect to at least see about a second worth of advantage if he switches onto the C5 tyre. That soft rubber gives him a bit more grip, a bit more mechanical grip to get that car around the track with a light fuel load for a quali run. Matt Daly currently P3 in this championship, 2 points behind Alex Smith, and currently in the 26s, not quite as quick as his nearest rivals at this point in time. We're seeing a few people not quite acclimatised, I'll try that again, to this car just yet. There's a few things to learn about this car. Obviously, its ground effect, aka the underneath the car, is pivotal in sucking the car down towards the asphalt, and that can have its own handling quirks. The cars can feel very kind of on a knife edge almost, and as well as that, they've got to battle with things like the ERS, the DRS system there. So these are hybrids, of course, just like any real-life Formula 1 car. 160 horsepower on tap and around about 800 horsepower in qualifying from the main engine, but 160 horsepower coming from that hybrid unit that the drivers have to configure on their steering wheel. So they have to think about how much energy they want to harvest on the lap, how much braking is going to be done by the energy recovery system, as well as other things like how much battery is used per lap as well. That is something that massively can affect not only qualifying but the race as well. Do you choose to eat your tyres and maybe save some ERS, or maybe you choose to use some ERS and save your tyres? But Matt Daly certainly eating his tyres on that run there, as he has to dive back into the pits, and he may, if he's particularly quick on this outlap, get another fast lap attempt in. But as it stands, with 2 minutes to go in qualifying, it is Andy Craker, Alex Smith, Colin Knief and Will Inglis. For some reason, Colin Knief, as you can see on the stream there, is down in P10. I can tell you, actually on the timing system, he's currently running in P3. So a good effort from him so far. It really wasn't a strong start to the season for Colin, actually. Had the pace, certainly, to get some decent results in, but unfortunately both races just starting with utter disaster, and he ended up basically coming away with no points. In fact, he was the only driver from our cohort last round to come away with 0 points at all. Not a record I'm sure he wants to carry on. So we're seeing him now heading into the midway stage of this lap and getting ready for one final fast lap attempt. Let's have a look and see who else is going to be giving it their all now in this final attempt in this lap. Alex Smith is coming towards the end of another fast lap attempt. He will get one more in if he so chooses. A big lock up there. You see the puff of smoke. That is not ideal. That will not look after your tyres well enough if you're hoping to get another fast lap in. Is only 2/10 down at this point in time. So doesn't have to sweat it too much, especially given that even with that lockup, that was a 125.099. So he's found 2/10 on his rival Andy Craig there. Fantastic effort from Alex Smith. Colin Knief next to cross the line there. Still, I believe that was an outlap actually, so still currently showing P10, but as we say, P4. Matt Daly comes across the line next. He will get another fast lap attempt in, but only just, as will Steve Knight and Andy Craig by the looks of things. They will just about become across the line for one final attempt here in qualifying. So we're going to go on board with Alex Smith in just a moment's time. In fact, no, we're going to go on board with Paul Millman to see what he can do in the remaining part of this session. Decent improvement there from Steve Knight. As it is all that she wrote for qualifying for Andy Craig, Will Inglis, Paul Millman, Rob Whitney, and I was about to say Reeve Taylor then. Of course, you can see that I'm there in P12, but of course, I'm not driving. Colin Knief abandons this lap as well. Paul Millman has come to the end of this lap here, heading through Sector 3, one of the tightest parts of the lap. In fact, the tightest part of the lap. It's much more of a test of your tyres than anything else. As we head now back onto that start-finish straight, hits the loud pedal. P6 at the moment, remains in P6, down by a few tenths of a second there. Next, it will be Alex Smith heading through that final complex of corners as well, weaving in celebration, in fact, deciding there's no point really in this lap, abandons it, and comes across the line there in a more chaotic fashion than perhaps we were expecting. As we go on board next with Matt Daly in kind of surrounded by a cloud of his own tyre smoke there. That's not usually the best sign in the world, as we see him now heading around that final corner for one last go of it here in qualifying. As he crosses the line, it's a 126.3. He does not improve. Next, it will be Jack Hodson on the C4 tyre. Actually, very interesting then, deciding that the C5 is too soft. He isn't going to be able to push it hard enough and make it exist in a kind of happy state at the end of the lap, and actually decides for the C4. Steve Knight into the 131s there right at the end of this session, and as he does jump onto the C5 tyre, he was starting to get the laps in. It's a shame then we didn't see any more further laps from Steve Knight at the end of that session, because we could have been potentially battling for the likes of P8, P7. So that brings an end to qualifying here at Istanbul Park. We'll catch you in just a few moments' time on the grid for race 1. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the grid, ready for the racing action here at Istanbul Park. It's round 2 of the Swarbrick.com Formula Alpha Championship 2024, and these drivers, I suspect, are raring and ready to go for a race that I'm actually I'm not too sure what we're going to see here. There's some very technical parts of the track, and it does differ quite immensely to the Circuit de Catalunya, which we visited a fortnight ago. It'll be interesting to see how the cars and the drivers cope here, especially with the likes of thinking about energy recovery, things like that as well, because there's some very interesting braking zones to negotiate here. So it'll be interesting to see what the strategy is looking like. Clearly opting for a softer tyre is everyone. The C2 and the C3 seems to be the tyre of choice for most drivers. A couple on the C4s, likewise, like for example Alan Thomas there on the C4 tyre, but most alternating between that medium tyre and that slightly softer tyre. So we shall see what comes of this. Welcome to everyone watching at home. Feel free to drop a comment in if you have any questions or queries about the racing you're seeing this evening. We're just ready to go with under 30 seconds here on the grid before we have 12 F1 cars screaming their way down towards the first corner of this 14-corner track. As we get ready then, the revs begin to rise. The lights are going off. Their race director had a little bit of a stumble there, but it is in fact 6 red lights on the gantry. And we are away for race 1 of round 2 here at Istanbul Park. Good launch for Alex Smith, a bit of the back end creeping out there. Colin Knief, meanwhile, fantastic start for him. Andy Craker barreled into the corner there, and there's been a massive pile up here at turn 1. It's easier to say who wasn't involved than who was involved in the end of this. Will Inglis, the big loser in all of that. Barry Clayton dropping positions as well, as did Andy Craker, of course. I think what we saw there was a bit of a domino effect of that first incident between Alex Smith and Andy Craker, and that just really escalated from there. Plenty of cars pretty much out of this race at the very start here. Matt Daly working his way up to P3. It has been a fantastic start for Alan Thomas here. Modified registrar, of course, is Alan Thomas. Started last season single-seater running with not the most confidence in the world. Ended up not continuing on with the series, but this should certainly build his confidence all the way up to P4 already, and he seems to be a little bit more happy in that car. Maybe it's his lovely new Simrig treating him rather nicely, that Thrustmaster 1000 wheel. Slightly jealous of that, Alan. As we continue on, Colin Knief then still in P2, about a second half down in comparison to Alex Smith. This is another great start for Alex Smith, just as he had in race 1 of the previous round and race 2 as well. This is what he needs. He needs to, straight away on lap 1, build that comfortable margin so he's not under pressure and he can just settle and focus on looking after the tyres, looking after the car, setting some decent laps without any major stress, and he'll clearly get some decent results, and he seems to be doing that so far. Matt Daly, meanwhile, is trying to put the pressure on Colin Knief. Long-time friendly rivals, of course. Matt Daly and Colin Knief always trading blows in whatever championship we run. These two certainly know how to race each other, so I suspect we'll be seeing more action from them later on. Just behind them is the aforementioned Alan Thomas in a very nice looking livery. He actually designed that livery entirely himself. Produced it, designed it, everything from scratch by himself. So nice work there, looking fantastic. As we see Rob Whitney there, currently running in P5. Another good start for him as well. Let's see, though, as he's under pressure from Andy Craker. Andy Craker, of course, setting some decent pace in qualifying. It wasn't to be in the end. Only pipped by about 0.2 of a second did he lose that pole position to. He's now side by side with Rob Whitney, as goes up the inside of the left-hander there and gets the position done. A little bit of trading paint in order to get the move done, but a relatively clean move regardless there, as Andy Craker takes a bit of an IndyCar line, actually, through that corner there. He does have substantial aero damage, I should mention. The rear wing and the front wing looking fairly unhappy there, as Rob Whitney loses another position now to Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton hoping to get ahead of some of the mid-pack and instead get back towards battling with those front runners, as he has done so many times in the past. At the end of the lap here, now heading through that final corner, Matt Daly actually gets ahead of Colin Knief. Is it going to be another spell of disaster for Colin Knief in this race? Well, disaster perhaps a bit too far. Still running in P3 at this point in time. Certainly nothing to sniff your nose at, but Matt Daly is clearly ahead with a decent margin as well, so I suspect the final part of the last lap not going entirely the way that Colin would have wanted. Setting purple sectors, though, is Matt Daly. He's clearly not focused on Colin Knief like we are. He's very much more focused on Alex Smith out in front. I believe there's been a big impact for Jack Hodson. Yes, there has. Front wing and rear wing gone there, now down in P9. Not a good start to the race for Jack there. Well, I said Matt Daly was focusing on keeping up with Colin Knief, and there is the commentator's curse already having its effect here in rounds 2. I was just about to say, but it looks like Colin Knief is putting up a good fight to Matt Daly, but there is the back end on Colin Knief's car stepping out, taking him off the track, and it's Colin Knief down in P3 once again. Steve Knight, meanwhile, up into P7. Rob Whitney, I believe, had a big off by the looks of things. Seems to be down on this Delta. Let's see if we can get ahead now as we run down through the mid part of the lap. Having a look at the inside is Rob Whitney. Stays behind Steve Knight, actually decides no point going for any brave overtakes yet. He saw how wrong that went for a few drivers on lap 1 there, so is thinking better of it. Always a sensible option, I think. Meanwhile, though, it is Matt Daly heading around that final corner once again with no real challenge from anyone at this point in time. His only challenge is up in front, trying to close that gap to Alex Smith. Andy Craker, meanwhile, also setting purple sectors. He'll be putting some pressure and some challenge on Alan Thomas now as we run down towards the first corner. Has a look up the inside. Fantastic move. Late on the brakes. Textbook overtaking opportunity there. And into the lead of this battle, at least, back up into P4. So actually, all things considered, a good recovery so far for Andy Craker. Less than 5 minutes into this 25 and a bit minute race, and he's already back up to P4. Alan Thomas, I suspect, might be struggling at the first start, the first phase of this race, rather, on that C4 compound of tyre. Should explain to any of you who are new, we run, just like in Formula 1, a range of 6 tyres ranging from C0 all the way to C6. C6 being the hardest, C0 being the softest. Apologies, I might be completely wrong there. Have I just got my numbers completely messed up? Either way, Alan Thomas is the outlier on strategy here, so we might wait to see how he copes in this battle against Andy Craker, at least. Temperatures might not be ideal at this stage in the race. Andy Craker building about a second worth of margin at this point, so already showing he's got some decent pace here. In fact, if we compare his pace at the moment to the rivals out in front, his current pace is a 1:28.2. That was his last lap. Colin Knief clearly having more difficulties on that last lap, 1:32, but he's currently setting purple on the current lap, so he's clearly got some pace underneath him. There is confirmation of that. He heads to start the next lap, as we've just seen him there, with a 1:27 under his belt. That is the second fastest lap of this race so far for Colin Knief. Matt Daly, meanwhile, 1:28.7. Alex Smith, 1:27.5. So Andy Craker is just about holding on with that pack of cars out in front. Colin Knief actually retiring from this session then, which is a great shame. This season really not starting the way that he would have wanted, and it looks to be continuing on that way. One lap he seems to be very happy with the car, and then the next it seems to all go wrong for him. So we're on board with Alan Thomas at the moment. He's actually running a slightly softer tyre in comparison to everyone else, so you'd expect him to have a bit of an advantage at this stage in the race. That doesn't seem to have come to fruition against the likes of Andy Craker, but let's see if it still holds him out in front of the mid-pack. We'll have to wait until later on to see if he's able to keep that position, or whether later on the tyres might be starting to beg for mercy a little bit later on into the race. Let's have a look at Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton in no man's land a little bit here. 5 seconds towards Alan Thomas out in front. Barry Clayton is currently lapping about a second a lap faster than Alan, so we expect a battle in around about 3 to 4, maybe 5 laps between those two. Rob Whitney as well, currently lapping very nicely indeed, around the same pace as Alan Thomas, so plenty of change upcoming in the mid-pack here in this race. Alex Smith, meanwhile, has been keeping some very Very competent pace out in front. A 127.6 on the last lap sees him still 7.5 seconds ahead of Matt Daly. Matt Daly's actually dropped off in pace ever so slightly. Both of them on the slightly harder tyre, the C2. Matt Daly not able to keep up with Alex Smith at this stage in the race. Andy Craker, in fact, is the driver able to keep up with Alex Smith, of course. He's been promoted to P3 with Colin Knief's retirement, and that sees Andy Craker back on the podium despite that slightly undesirable race start, shall we say. As you can see, the big lock-up for Alex Smith. Matt Daly actually using one of the DRS zones there. So just like in modern Formula 1, down the big straight, if you have a DRS detection zone, you can open the wing flap on the back of the car there. We should see it heading down the start-finish straight now, where you'll see the car able to open its rear spoiler ever so slightly and gain a little bit more time as he does so there. But unlike modern Formula 1, you do not have to be within another second of the car in front of you in order to deploy that. We allow the drivers to use the tech at any point of the lap as they choose, so they can get that extra advantage down the straight. It's all about remembering to use it, really. That is the biggest thing to get used to. Really is the first couple of races. You might see the odd driver here or there forget to use the DRS, as I've done a few times in this car. Alan Thomas and Barry Clayton, the battle that we predicted, is coming up now. The back end of Alan Thomas's car actually creeping out a little bit there as we head through the first couple of corners, which might be expected at this stage in the race. We're getting closer to the halfway stage, and with the C4 compounder tyre, what you could be expecting is the tyres now starting to overheat, and as they overheat, you lose grip. And obviously, as you lose grip, you slide about more, they overheat more, and you lose more grip. It is a real snowball effect there, and we could be seeing that now in Alan Thomas's car. The car looks very eager to rotate and turn into some of these corners here, but through others, it looks like the mechanical grip on the back end could be beginning to give out ever so slightly. Alex Smith, meanwhile, clearly having no tyre troubles, has just gone purple again in another sector there. So fantastic pace in the car for Alex Smith at this stage. Good to see he was actually able to join in. He was having some technical issues, just like we were at the start of the stream, and he was able to join in the end, though. Barry Clayton, meanwhile, putting the pressure on Alan Thomas, and Alan Thomas cracking under that pressure as we head through the final complex of corners, turn 13, turn 14 here. Barry Clayton was able to force Alan Thomas wide from actually quite the distance back. And now it is Barry Clayton up into P4, Alan Thomas down in P5, and using that DRS, as we can see, in order to try and keep up with Barry Clayton. He does, I should mention, have a slightly extra benefit as well. Obviously, we don't quite know what the drivers are running in terms of energy recovery mode, in terms of battery deployment, but what I can tell you is that if Alan Thomas is behind Barry Clayton there with another big slide, if he is in that slipstream, he does get, of course, a few more miles an hour under his belt, because you're not having to force your way through that air. The car in front of you is doing that for you, and you're able to gain a few more miles an hour by following the car closely behind. What we saw then was Alan Thomas riding over that curb, and riding over that curb a little bit too hard. The curbs, as you might expect on stream, look very flat and very inviting almost if you're trying to take the racing line, and some curbs when you're in the car can also look that way as well, but they can be deceiving, and that looks to be one of those for Alan Thomas. He rode over the curbs and the car just wasn't going to have it, and the back end kicked out. He's now lost that slipstream advantage that he would have with Barry Clayton as he drops back, and he now needs to focus really on bringing that car home as quickly, but also as safely as possible, because he wants to look after those tyres, otherwise they're going to fall off a cliff edge later on into this race. These Pirelli-inspired tyres, just like the real-life counterparts, have a big cliff edge to them, and I suspect we could be seeing that now in Alan Thomas's case, where the tyres can, grip very well at the start of their stint, at the start of the race. As you go further into the race, you can sense the car losing a little bit of grip, but otherwise still driving okay, and then over the course of about 2 to 3 laps, the car just becomes completely undrivable as the tyres wear out, and that might be what we're seeing now with Alan Thomas's car. Let's have a look at Steve Knight. Steve Knight's been having a great race so far. That's qualified further back, of course, but I suspect as a result of that, kept out of that lap 1 carnage here at turn 1. Turn 1 actually very inspired by Brazil's turn 1 at Interlagos, of course, that complex of the sharp left-hander downhill followed by the sweeping right-hander, and then the left-hander again, very reminiscent of Interlagos. But Steve Knight was able to keep the nose clean and has been rewarded for it, of course, but now might be under pressure in this second half of the race. Now, Rob Whitney behind, he's got some good pace underneath him on the C3 tyre as well, so a slightly grippier tyre, capable of slightly more if it's in good condition. But Rob Whitney isn't too focused on the battle with Steve Knight at the moment. He's much more focused on the battle with Paul Millman at this stage, as we see now heading through the middle part of the lap. We have the big left-hander here. This really stresses actually the front right tyre. That really puts quite a lot of temperature in it as we enter the next braking zone now. About 1 second separating all three of these cars. In fact, all four of these cars, because Jack Hodson is back in the mix as well. And Jack Hodson actually now putting pressure on Paul Millman. It's not going to be a battle between Rob Whitney and Paul Millman. It's going to be a collision between Paul Millman and Jack Hodson. Jack Hodson, I suspect, was trying to find a way around Paul Millman with quite a pace delta between the two. So Jack Hodson had quite a pace advantage in terms of straight line speed. He was running quite a bit faster and was trying to drive around, but unfortunately they were just coming together. It's one of those racing incidents that happens every now and again, and that has really hurt Jack Hodson's chances in this race. He's got plenty of aero damage on his car now. Paul Millman has somehow recovered rather well from that, and more than recovered well. He's actually got an overtake done heading into turn 1 on Rob Whitney. Rob Whitney dropping down now to P8. Paul Millman, meanwhile, running in P7, and all of this is helping Steve Knight out immensely. If they continue to battle each other, they're going to slow each other down, and Steve Knight, who isn't quite involved in this battling, is able to rest somewhat easy and run without too much trouble. That might be over now as Paul Millman gets ahead of Rob Whitney and instead sets its sights on the aforementioned Steve Knight, but we shall see in the next few corners how that works out for him. We'll be seeing as well in the next few laps how the tyre strategy works out for Alan Thomas. About 40 seconds off the lead of this race, but more importantly for his sake, about 20 seconds clear of P6. There'll be some good points on offer if he is able to remain in this position, of course, but those tyres are a big question mark at this stage in the race. Barry Clayton, meanwhile, is lapping rather nicely in P4 on the C3 tyre, probably the safe bet. A good mix of pace and endurance, although we can't give a full assessment of that yet because we haven't seen this car in race trim at this track on this tyre. We will have a better idea at the end of this first race how the C3 tyre shaped up, or will it hit its own cliff edge? We'll just have to find out in the next few laps, and if that is the case, I suspect we'll be seeing a few drivers change their tyre strategy, as I suspect we'll be seeing for Alan Thomas's case as well, in order to try and make some last-minute changes to try and improve their chances in race 2, the reverse grid race coming up in the next few minutes. Of course, right after race 1, we jump into that reverse grid action where the top 8 of the grid are all changed around in their order. So if you finish P1, you start race 2 in P8, and that adds a little bit more excitement and tension and a little bit more of a strategic mystery, if you will, into the second race of the evening, as Matt Daly's car, it must be said, not looking entirely comfortable out there at this stage. I don't know if it's tyres or if maybe something's wrong aero-wise with the car, but we're seeing quite a few lockups and the car shimmying about a lot on track, so not sure what's going on there. There we see him running a little bit wide through turn 1. We'll just have to see if he can bring it home safely. Last time I said this at a track that shared traits with Interlagos, it was Interlagos, and I said that all Matt Daly had to do was bring it home safely, as he was leading the race by about 10 seconds. And on the penultimate lap, I said that, and he crashes out. So we'll be hoping we don't have a repeat of that, because I'm quite bored now of my commentator's curse. It seems to be really strong here in the AROC Racing Leagues. I must admit, in all the other series that I do, it doesn't seem to be that strong. It's just this one in particular. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I've had a really reliable Alfa myself, so I'm being punished in this way. Whatever it is, I appear to be really mean to some of the drivers, and the track seems to have been a bit mean to Alex Smith, as about 5 seconds now separates him and Matt Daly. I suspect a big spin out there. Of course, we haven't had any confirmation. His delta is up by about 10 seconds, and as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, the predicted lap is up substantially as well. Predicted now at 1:38, maybe 1:39 on this lap. So a big spin-off for Alex Smith there. Didn't quite catch if he got any damage from that. So we'll see in the next couple of laps what his pace is looking like, and if he is able to bring it home without the threat of Matt Daly looming just 5 seconds behind there. Let's have a look at what is going on elsewhere in the field. Well, Paul Millman has got ahead of Steve Knight eventually. And now Steve Knight is running quite clear of Jack Hudson and Rob Whitney. I suspect Rob Whitney has had his own issue there and drops down to P9 as a result. So not quite the weekend to remember like he had at the first race of the season. He had a good weekend at Interlagos. No, I've been talking a lot about Interlagos this evening as we have another big issue for Rob Whitney there. But it is, in fact, is that a big off for... No, it is not. That is just a timing error there. Fear not, there hasn't been a big issue at the front end of the field. We're on board at the moment with Andy Craker, currently running in P3. P2, P3. No, the timing system's having a small meltdown, but I'm sure we'll find out what's going on in the end. Steve Knight has had a big off, I can tell you that, and drops down to P8. Meanwhile, Rob Whitney is still down in P9, as we were saying before the chaos begun. Yeah, a good weekend in round one. Unfortunately, not quite the same in round two so far, but still points to take away from this race weekend, at least in race one. Of course, we've got race two coming up in a few minutes' time. And speaking of the standings, I appear to be mistaken there because yeah, it was not just a good weekend for Rob Whitney in round one. It was a really quite exceptional weekend for Rob Whitney. He's running in P4 at the moment as Jack Hudson has a big off there and ends up in the gravel trap. That will allow Steve Knight past, will allow Rob Whitney past as well. It will. Rob Whitney back up to P8. Jack Hudson dropping down to P9 once again. What a shame. This race not quite going the way that he would have wanted, really. But Rob Whitney currently running P4 in the championship with 20 points to his name. So two really solid races in round one, unfortunately not followed in round two. Speaking of that championship, let's have a look at how it shapes up before we head into race two with our findings from the first race. So round one, Alex Smith, of course, leading the championship with 50 points to his name. Then we drop to P2, Andy Craker with 28 points to his name. He's currently hunting down Matt Daly. Matt Daly, who of course in the championship at this point in time is P3 with 26. The aforementioned Rob Whitney is in P4 with 20. Andrew Rammer P5 with 18. Alan Matthews P6 with 15, matched by Paul Brady. Jack Hudson in P8 with 14. Will Inglis P9 with 6. Paul Millman with 6 as well in P10. And then we have Steve Knight, Guy Swarbrick and Colin Knief rounding out the order in this championship. Now, Matt Daly is very much under pressure from Andy Craker with less than 5 minutes to go in this race. Both drivers locking up heading into turn 12 there. And in terms of their pace at the moment, there's Andy Craker who clearly wins out on that C2 tyre. He's looked after it a little bit more than Matt Daly has been able to. That's either down to driving style or setup as well, because of course this is an open setup championship. Drivers are free to chop and change things like the tyre pressures, camber angles, aero, things like that on their setup to suit their needs best, and that will of course have an effect on the tyres, and we're potentially seeing that now as Andy Craker seems to be all over Matt Daly as we head into the second sector in just a moment's time. Big right-hander coming up next for these two. That is lapped traffic out in front. I suspect that could play some type of effect in this battle for P2 here. We've seen plenty of times in the past. It's one thing to try and get an overtake done. It's another thing to try and get an overtake done when you've also got to manage traffic with blue flags. Of course, we don't actually run blue flags in this series. If you're a lap down, you are free to continue running at full pelt in order to not affect your own race, and it is the onus is on the driver on the lead lap in order to get past if they are able to do so. No such thing as a blue flag here in the AROC racing leagues. As we continue on through the sweeping right-hander down towards turn 12 in just a moment. It's side by side for Andy Craker and Matt Daly. Matt Daly has the inside, but Andy Craker has the pace. He goes deep into turn 12 there. That could cost him big time. It gives him the inside for turn 13. It has just about saved him, actually. And a good defence from Matt Daly there, letting the track come back towards him, letting that inside line come back towards the front end of his car in order to keep Andy Craker at bay, and it certainly has done so, as now Matt Daly benefits from a slipstream from the lap traffic of Rob Whitney, and now Rob Whitney actually blocking Andy Craker a little bit, and this is just the way that Matt Daly wanted this lap to go. In fact, the past few corners have gone perfectly for him. It could be going better, arguably. I'm sure he'd probably prefer it if Andy Craker was in a barrier somewhere, but that isn't the case, unfortunately, for Matt. They are only half a second apart once again, as Andy Craker has the pace clearly at this stage in the race. It's just, does he have enough pace in order to get the move done. It's one thing to catch up to a car. It's another thing to overtake. I suspect you need about anywhere from half a second to a second worth of pace advantage in order to get the overtake done on this lap in racing conditions. And in terms of their pace at the moment, if you look at the raw maths, that isn't the case actually. Andy Craker and Matt Daly only separated by about 0.3 of a second on that last lap in terms of overall pace. Of course, that is going to change immensely given what they are doing, how they are battling, and at what point of the lap they are battling as well as we run down towards that final corner complex. Once again, this time, the roles have reversed. Andy Craker very bold into the final corner complex there. Very late on the brakes indeed. Ran wide into the track, actually made contact with Matt Daly. Might be losing out. He has the inside for the final corner and gets back on the throttle quick enough. The rear end grips up and he is able to continue on in front of Matt Daly this time around. Both drivers using that DRS system then to full effect in order to get the most pace. And heading into turn one, still very close together, of course. Less than 0.2 of a second separating them. Matt Daly having a look to see if there's somewhere he can go around the outside. No, he waits, in fact, for the fifth corner. It is the left-hander, has the inside there. Doesn't quite work out for him. He's going to have to try once again later on into the lap. There is Jack Hodson actually having a little off on his lap. Drops back behind the two front runners here. This battling, of course, we wondered whether Alex Smith, given his issues a few laps ago, we wondered whether he was going to be able to make it home safely. He certainly seems like he's going to be able to now. These two have been battling so hard, they've actually slowed each other down a little bit. And in fact, Matt Daly slowing down more than Andy Craker as well, dropping back by about a second now. About a second and a half, in fact, for Matt Daly. So Andy Craker breathing a little bit easier. Alex Smith certainly breathing a little bit more easier now with a nice 8-second margin at the end of this race. The timer is about to hit 0 seconds, and that means it is less than 2 laps to go in this race. In fact, this is the penultimate lap of this race at this point in time as Alex Smith heads around the final corner for the penultimate time. It is one last lap here at Istanbul Park, ready to go. As we now start that final lap of this race, let's have a quick look actually at Alan Thomas. In terms of his pace at the moment, he's lapping in the 1:34 region, so he's actually the slowest car out on track at this stage. I suspect that car really not enjoyable to drive at this stage with some very old soft compound tyres now. But luckily for him, there's been so much chaos in front of him and behind him. He hasn't had to worry too much about pressure, so he's just been able to focus on bringing that car home safely. I suspect if we see him drop maybe onto the C3 tyre on the next in the next race, we could see a bit more from Alan Thomas in this race weekend as we go back on board with Alex Smith as we celebrate what will be a bit of a parade lap for him, really. He hasn't had too much to think about in this race, apart from a little bit of an issue a few laps ago, but it's just been 17 laps of fun out there, I think, for Alex Smith as he heads now into that final corner complex. In the pink and white liveried car, it will be another race victory to add to his already impressive tally. Just 2 races in, 1 round in, and it is 50 points already to his name, and he looks to expand that advantage as we head into the second half of the second round here. Alan Thomas has had a big off. Will he be able to recover? He will, actually, as he starts his final lap of the race. It is a big impact. It is rear wing and front wing for Alan Thomas, but for Alex Smith, it is celebrations all around as he heads around the final left-hander, weaving across the line in celebration, just like qualifying, taking the race 1 victory with another catastrophic accident. What a way to finish the running there. Andy Craker challenging Matt Daly and winning out in the end, coming home P2, and will be Matt Daly rounding out the podium in P3 there. Well done to our top 3, all heading around the first corner now. Some really impressive driving from all 3 there as they enjoy some Demolition Derby now instead, as Barry Clayton will be coming home in a few moments' time there, as these two clearly not entirely aware that there's still an active race going on. There is Jack Hodson a lap down, who does come home in the end. Just deciding the front runners clearly that they're going to actually enjoy a bit of Demolition Derby instead. That these cars aren't needed for race 2 in a few moments' time, so let's take the front wings off. As we see Andy Craker and Alex Smith are filling my damage screens. Barry Clayton comes across the line to take P4 in the end. Then not too far behind there, we will have Alan Thomas in just a moment. But we have some rallycross going on as Jack Hodson goes across the gravel there. Is anyone else still just having major accidents with each other? No, we seem to be behaving ourselves now, which is good. as we head now run through the final couple of corners. Alan Thomas under pressure from Paul Millman here. Obviously having that issue a lap ago has put him in Paul Millman's sights, but it won't be enough in the end to make him lose the position. It will be Alan Thomas coming home P5, his first big points haul in the AROC Racing Leagues. Paul Millman closer behind in P6 as well. That rounds out the running for race 1 here. In the end, it was Steve Knight P7, Jack Hodson P8, and Rob Whitney P9. Race 1 certainly delivered in terms of action and chaos. Let's hope that race 2 is much the same. Join us, as we can see there, the steering on Alex Smith's car is completely, utterly skew. If that looks like my old BMW 3 Series, my 330 steers like that at this moment in time. So get that checked. But we'll catch you in just a few moments' time as we get ready for race 2, the reverse grid race here at Istanbul Park. And welcome back to the action, ladies and gentlemen. We're on the grid here at Istanbul Park, ready for race 2, the reverse grid race, of course. So let's have a run through of what that grid is looking at. It is Steve Knight on the pole here, with Paul Millman alongside him on the front row. Alan Thomas in P3. He could be one to watch out for, actually. He had some alright pace, actually, when the tyres were working for him. And he's now he's still actually on the C4 tyre, interestingly. So he might get ahead here at the start of the race. It's just whether or not he can maintain that later on. Barry Clayton running in P4, then Matt Daly P5, he'll be one to watch out for as well, of course. Andy Craker and Alex Smith further down the order than perhaps they would otherwise like. They've got a few cars in front to get ahead of, but I'm sure with their pace they will certainly make a go of it at least. Then we have Jack Hodson, Rob Whitney and Will Inglis actually able to join us once again for race 2, which is good to see. He tries to get a few more points under his belt. He's currently running in P9 with 6 points in this championship, but we know he's capable of a lot more than that. So, just over 30 seconds to go now until lights out. Apart from that, I don't think we have any changes in tyre compound. A mix of the C2 and C3 tyres, with Alan Thomas still opting for that grippier tyre at the start of the race. Be interesting to see if that has worked. Maybe he's changed something like running a bit less, a bit more tyre pressure. That could be helpful. It costs you some grip, but of course, temperature management is a little bit easier. Less than 10 seconds now, as we actually have a few drivers on the push-to-pass system, the DRS system, which might cost them on this launch, actually. You want as much downforce as possible. Let's see, as we get 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for race 2 here, Istanbul Park. Most drivers actually veering off towards the grass, seemingly there. A few more get it under control than others, and that allows Paul Millman to run away into the lead of this race. Matt Daly is up into P2, Andy Craker P3 as well. Steve Knight really lost big time on that race start there, dropping down all the way to the back end of the running in P9. Alex Smith and Alan Thomas had a collision there, but no major ill effects from that, which is good to see. A few little rough and tumble collisions as well, but Alan Thomas all the way up into P4, so dropped a position actually overall, but still a decent start as Matt Daly works his way up into P1, gets ahead of Paul Millman, while Andy Craker is still struggling. Paul Millman on the softer compounder tyre might have a little bit more mechanical grip in his car, but will be losing out in terms of grip later on into the race, so we'll have to see how this plays out for him as we have a mixture of compounds on the top 4 here. Alan Thomas should be able to keep the likes of, and maybe not keep the likes of Alex Smith behind because he does have so much pace in that car, but maybe the likes of Will Inglis, Jack Hodson, at bay at least for at least some time, so could be on for another decent result here as things stand. We're going to go back and have a look at what's going on at the front end of the field as Alex Smith actually puts the pressure on Alan Thomas. Gets a textbook move done there up the inside. Alan Thomas didn't quite see where he was. Difficult to see out these cars, of course. Goes off the track actually. Is able to rejoin. Hasn't lost out anything really of note. Continues on with a slightly chaotic end to that lap. Meanwhile, Andy Craker gets ahead of Paul Millman. So now it is the battle that was for P2, of course, just in the previous race. It is now the battle for P1 this time around. Alex Smith not quite getting as fortunate of a start as he did in race 1, and not quite as fortunate as compared to his rivals as well. Currently running in P4. 7/10 down on Paul Millman at this point in time. Both of them actually Paul Millman on the slightly softer tyre, so could provide some difficulty here. As we see just behind him, Alan Thomas, Jack Hodson and Will Inglis all enjoying a bit of a battle here, as it's going to be Will Inglis putting the pressure on Jack Hodson. Will Inglis, the back end steps out on his car. A few drivers have reported that this car in particular seems to be a little bit sensitive on the rear end. Of course, the slightly lower speed corners, ground effect isn't going to be doing too much for you. And not only that, these cars are turbo hybrids. There's an immense amount of torque, not only from that 1.6 litre V6 internal combustion engine, there's also an immense amount of instant on-demand torque from that big electric motor as well. It is going to really kick you in the back with some decent torque. Think of driving, if you've ever driven any modern electric car, and it's going to be like that in combination with a big racing V6 as well. It is really quite a torquey monster, this car. Asks a lot of the rear tyres, a lot of torque around on that rear axle, and it can kick the arse out of the car a little bit. Pardon my French there, but that's just how it is. As we see Jack Hodson actually ahead of Alan Thomas, and now side by side with Will Inglis. Will Inglis runs down the first corner up the inside there. Alan Thomas potentially overworking his tyres a little bit here early on in the race, running a bit too much temperature and a loss of grip there, potentially causing a lack of pace. As we see him down in P7, so this race not working out the way that we perhaps thought it would have, given his high starting position. Meanwhile, Will Inglis in P6 at this moment, a few tenths down, in fact a couple of seconds down on Jack Hodson. Jack Hodson so far enjoying a much more agreeable race in comparison to race 1, running in P5 at the moment, and on at least at the moment, on course for some decent points. Meanwhile, speaking of decent points, Matt Daly currently leads this race, but Andy Craker wants some decent points here and wants to change that situation there. About 7/10 down on Matt Daly at the moment in time, as we head now down towards the final complex of corners here. Half a second separating these two cars now, as we run into turn 11 and turn 12. Both cars having a big lock up there. It just seems to be one of those corners that lends itself to that, really, as we head around the final left-hander now back on to the loud pedal. And we see Andy Craker in that slipstream there, but He was a little bit too far back to make any type of move stick this time around, but he is perhaps a little bit closer on this lap. Alex Smith, meanwhile, has worked his way up into P3 now, so a little bit more where we would expect him to be, and we'll just have to wait and see. Will Alex Smith potentially get another race victory under his belt here? Well, let's have a look at their pace at the moment. These two, of course, battling each other, slightly slowing each other down. Nowhere near to the effect that they were late on in race 1, rather, but still slowing each other down just a little bit, lapping in the mid 127s. Meanwhile, Alex Smith, 127.6 on that last lap, so matching them in pace at least. Let's see if we can find a little bit more pace in that car to actually begin to hunt them down. Of course, not only could he do it on pace, if there's any type of issue between these two cars, something could go quite wrong, as Alan Thomas and Willie Gliss have had a big impact together, actually. Alan Thomas still reeling from that now as he heads down towards the infield, very narrowly misses some other cars as well. Willie Gliss, unfortunately, retiring from this session as a result of that impact. Not sure what went on there, and we've had a change of position as well, as it's side by side into the final couple of corners. Matt Daly hangs to it on the inside despite Andy Craker's late braking move. Andy Craker, though, has the inside for the next corners and is able to keep the position, or is he? Matt Daly up the inside, heading through the final corner. It's still side by side now as we go across the start-finish line in just a moment's time. There is Alex Smith in the midst of it as well, running down into the first corner. Andy Craker has the outside, but keeps it going the long way around. The back end steps out on him this time, and he drops down to P2. Not only does he lose a position to Matt Daly, now Alex Smith says, thank you very much, I want a shot at this, and now the battle is between Andy Craker and Alex Smith, as we see Andy Craker taking all the defensive lines that he can in order to keep Alex Smith at bay. The more defensive lines he takes, though, the more Matt Daly is going to slowly disappear into the distance. What an exciting few corners that was, as we see Andy Craker now actually running a little bit wide. Is he doing that on purpose, or is the car starting to give up in terms of grip? Has he worked those tyres a little bit too hard? Let's just find out and see, as Alex Smith riding over those ever so inviting curbs. The back end steps out in his car as he rides over the camber of the curbs there. The car says, I can't cope with this, and just goes veering off into the distance, into the gravel trap, into the barriers as well. Alex Smith damages his rear wing, I can tell you. That car's rear wing is not quite as good as it once was, and now Alex Smith drops down into P5. A bit of a disaster for Alex Smith then, as it turns out. Meanwhile, because of all this close battling, Jack Holtz and Paul Millman, who really weren't too much in the mix of things in race 1, have now found themselves, all of a sudden, only 5 seconds down on P1 and P2. And it's currently Jack Hodson running in P3 at this moment in time, but I suspect that these two could be battling just a little bit more fiercely now that the stakes have risen just that little bit more. Let's see what Alex Smith can do, though. He's still not completely out of the count yet. He will be a little bit hurting in terms of pace. In fact, has to dive into the pit. He must be really hurting. I suspect potentially a puncture or a lack of pressure in the tyres. Maybe the tyres are just completely damaged. Either way, he dives into the pits, and this, you have to say, brings a bit of an end to his race. What a shame for Alex Smith. On a bit of a roll at the start of this season, that roll has come to an end. As we go back on board with Matt Daly, though, a second ahead of Andy Craker, I suspect this battle is going to continue on once again. Let's just see now, as we're running through Sector 2 at the moment, what will happen between these two cars out in front of the field. I suspect Andy Craker is slowly but surely closing that gap as he now gets a little bit of slipstream. Not quite enough to make too much of a difference, but just a little bit more than perhaps he had otherwise, and can start reading in Matt Daly now and continuing on that fantastic battle that we had just a few laps ago. As we see, heading through the final couple of corners once again, it's a little bit less rough and tumble than what we had a couple of laps ago, but still the pressure is certainly mounting. Let's have a quick look at what's going on elsewhere in the field. It's Rob Whitney leading Alan Thomas and Alex Smith, as we know that Alan Thomas certainly had some decent pace underneath him in race 1. It just hasn't unfortunately worked out for him here in race 2. He hasn't had that good consistent race start that he enjoyed in the first race, and as such seems to be a little bit out of rhythm, if you will. Seems to be struggling a little bit more with this race, as Steve Knight actually gets ahead of Alex Smith now. Alex Smith is back in the running, at least he's currently running in P6, so still potential points on the cars, just not quite the race victory that I'm sure he would have wanted. Meanwhile, the battle between Andy Craker and Matt Daly continues on once again. As we run out towards the end of Sector 2, Andy Craker, the man in black, begins to put the pressure on, having a quick look at the inside there. Seeing if maybe he can make a Formula Alpha-sized gap fit. Now as we run down through the final long sweeping right-hander, it's effectively a back straight. In fact, it has a DRS zone. And there we see Andy Craker using it to good effect as we head into that final couple of corners. A good switchback move there sees Andy Craker now leading this race. Matt Daly still putting the pressure on, though. Both of them taking the tight inside line there as we head around that final corner and running down the start-finish straight. Once again, it's Matt Daly very close behind there, completely attached to the rear axle of Andy Craker's car as we run through the first corner, running a little bit wide. Doesn't run too wide, of course, and hit that gravel trap. But about as much as you can realistically push it. Both drivers on the C2 tyre. 7 laps into this 17-lap race now as we run through turns 4, turns 5 in the next few moments here. Barry Clayton actually in the pits at the moment, so unfortunately for Barry Clayton, a bit of a premature end to his running in this race as well, as we now head through the middle sector of the lap. Let's have a quick look back at how the championship is shaping up. And you can do this yourselves, of course, by going to the webpage AROC2, so that is AROC number 2, so AROC2.emperorservers.com, and then there you'll be able to either look at the current live event, or you can have a quick look at the championship as Matt Daly rides one of those curves a little bit too aggressively. The back end steps out, and the car actually stepped out because he actually got some airtime there. So I imagine the engineers in the pit lane aren't too keen on that one. The suspension, the gearbox, and some of the floor as well, potentially hurting from that. But he is able to carry on just in a little bit more of a gap than perhaps he would have liked to Andy Craker. Speaking of a gap, the gap between Rob Whitney and Alan Thomas has actually increased ever so slightly now to about 1.3 seconds now between these two cars as we get closer to the halfway stage of this race. But if we have a look at that aforementioned Championship League table, I can tell you that obviously with that race win in race 1, it is Alex Smith who extends his lead. Currently running in P6, so it won't quite be going that way for him here in race 2. But 75 points to his name. Andy Craker, the man currently leading this race, in P2 with 46 points to his name. Then we have Matt Daly in P3, the man in P2, trailing behind Andy Craker in this race and in the championship as well with 41 points to his name. Then we have Rob Whitney still holding on to that P4 in the championship with 22 points to his name. Andy Brown at P5, not here this evening, of course. Jack Hodson currently P6 with 18 points to his name as well. This is working out to be a very good race for Jack Hodson. Some decent points to be had here, and it will benefit him greatly in the championship, of course. And then we have, in fact, that would put him to P4 in the championship as things stand. Then we have Jack, so we've already talked about Jack Hodson. Then we would have Paul Brady, not here this evening either. Paul Millman, the next driver who is here this evening. P9 with 14 points to his name at this point in time in the championship, as he looks to gain a few more points from this race as well. Currently running P4, good race for him so far. Barry Clayton as well, unfortunately things not going his way. He won't be scoring any more than the 12 points he currently has to his name, as Alex Smith actually gets ahead of Steve Knight. Has Steve Knight had a bit of an issue? No. Alex Smith has just been able to get ahead of him, and now it's Alex Smith in P5. But Rob Whitney now under pressure from Alan Thomas. As you can see, Alan Thomas running a little wide there, putting as much pressure as possible on the car up in front. Alan Thomas currently in P11 in the championship with 10 points to his name, just ahead of Steve Knight, Willingless, Guy Shawbrick and Colin Kneath, who does actually take a point from, is actually classified and takes a point from this race weekend, but still last in the championship for his efforts. Shame he's actually A-star rated, so shows he's a good, safe, clean driver. Knows what he's doing, has great pace underneath him, just unfortunately the races have not worked out so far. He really doesn't seem to have gelled with this car as things stand. Hopefully we can see a turnaround in fortunes for him, as we are now for Rob Whitney, as they are side by side heading down the start-finish straight, running into turn 1. Alan Thomas with the inside. He brakes later and gets the move done. That's Alan Thomas up into P7 now. Meanwhile, looking at the front end of the field, the gap between Andy Craker and Matt Daly has remained a little consistent for the past few laps now. It's around about 2 seconds at this stage. As we enter, as we head through our 10th lap of this race. We're looking at Rob Whitney here. He's still trailing behind Alan Thomas, but Alan Thomas lost a decent amount of pace through that corner. Actually, I think he might have deployed DRS a little bit too early. I'm not quite sure there. Either way, lost some decent pace and is defending against Rob Whitney heading in to the braking zone into the final couple of corners there. It's good matching these two, enjoying a bit of battling here as we go on board with Jack Hodson, our man currently in P3 there. We see the suspension working hard as he runs through the middle part of the lap. Now the back end stepping out as we go on board with him, and he heads straight into the barrier. And would you believe it, it's another case of trusting the curbs too much, and that has sent his car absolutely flying. It's a shame for Jack Hodson that with one small error, that really is the commentator's curse continuing its effect there, and that's Jack Hodson down to P4. Paul Milman very happy of course, because this gives him another chance at a podium here, running in P3 at the moment. As it's been a little one. We've certainly seen now a few Paul Milman podiums. They're not the most common thing in the world, but they're certainly not a rarity anymore. He's progressed well in his sim racing career, has Paul Milman, and we could be on for another good one here, unless Jack Hodson has anything to say about it in the final 10 minutes of this race now. As we are on our 11th lap with about 6 or 7 laps to go. Jack Hodson is trying to put that pressure on Paul Milman. Let's compare their pace, their outright pace, their best pace of the race so far. That trophy goes to Jack Hodson. His best lap on the C3 tyre, a 128.2, whereas Paul Milman's best lap is a 129.5. But as we can see here, I don't think Jack Hodson is going to be able to keep those best laps up because his car is a little bit wounded after that earlier race incident. Heading into the barrier on the last lap has cost him big time there. The car looks nowhere near as enjoyable to drive now. We're seeing the effects of that on this lap as well, as he builds that gap even more between him and Paul Milman as he drops further back behind. He's potentially going to be under threat from Alex Smith. In fact, if we can compare their current pace, well, Jack Hodson was in the 28s, currently in the 41s on this lap, owing to his last lap. We'll still be a little bit down on this lap as well, so let's call it 28-29, whereas Alex Smith is in the 27s, the low 127s. He's the fastest car on track at the moment, and outright as well. 27.3 is his current pace, and his best lap is a 27.1, so he's absolutely flying along, is Alex Smith, trying to make up for that race start, of course, as he has Jack Hodson firmly in his sights now as we head through the final few corners. I suspect this should be slightly easy pickings for Alex Smith, and if he's lucky, he may be able to put some pressure on Paul Milman. We know it's certainly going to just be a battle for P3. He won't be aiming for any more in this race, but we do know at least that he might be, if he's particularly lucky, able to battle Paul Milman rather for that P3 spot. First, though, he's got to battle Jack Hodson. At the moment, lapping in the 27.1s, and we mentioned Jack Hodson in the 35s in that last lap, and now putting the pressure on. Takes a much tighter line up the inside. He might get his move done on merit around the outside of the next corner. He's not quite able to just yet, though. Well defended by Jack Hodson so far, although he has left the door open for Alex Smith to go on by there, and he does so up into P4 for Alex Smith then. Now his sights firmly set on Paul Milman. Paul Milman lapping in the 31s. Alex Smith still in the 27s. Now I suspect, of course, I was going to say the tyres will begin to drop off for Alex Smith, but Alex Smith a few laps ago, of course, pitted, repaired his damage, got some new tyres, and is able to continue on. So his car, out of everyone on track, is in by far and away the best condition here. So this might have actually been a very good call from Alex Smith. It's very rare in this sprint racing format. Remember, it's only 25 minutes plus a lap. You don't usually have any main advantage at all to going into the pits. It costs you far too much time, but it's clearly worked here for Alex Smith, who was able to do a fairly quick dash into the pits. It might have been a penalty, but I suspect, given his pace at the moment, it was tyres as well, as he was able to dash back out and has had some great pace ever since. And this could help him immensely in this race. If anything, he comes out net neutral. He was running around about P4, P3 before he had to dive into the pits. Gets caught up in that instance, of course, earlier on in the race. and he comes out down in P6, has worked his way back up to P3. So he's at least come out of this having lost nothing, but instead getting fastest lap point as well for his troubles. And he's looking rather competitive at this stage in the race, it must be said. Still lapping in the 28s now, actually, for Alex Smith, whereas Paul Milman's in the 32s. So still a 4-second pace advantage. This has to be easy pickings now for Alex Smith. A great shame for Paul Milman. Deserves another podium under his belt, but it wasn't to be this time round by the looks of things. Let's just see, though. I've got many things wrong in the past. I could very easily get this one as well. Actually, Alex Smith running a little bit wide there, pushing car as much as possible, gives him the outside. Late on the brakes, I suspect. No, actually, not quite as late on the brakes as Paul Milman. Paul Milman, who had the inside line there, bravery sees him through and back into P3. A fantastic move from Paul Milman there, as this battle, I suspect, could be going on for a little while longer if Alex Smith isn't able to get this move done. He's very brave there, going off the track, actually, with half of his car, and up the inside of the final braking zone into the final corner. He is able to get that move done. But is he able to get it done well enough? Because we've seen Paul Milman feeling very confident on the brakes, clearly, and is now in the slipstream of Alex Smith up in front. It looks to be all said and done, to be fair. Alex Smith is running in P3 at the moment and seems to be maintaining that position at this point in time. So good recovery overall for Alex Smith then. Actually losing a little bit more pace as well. Alex Smith now in the 29, so I suspect he's really capitalised on some good grip in his car. Running a slightly softer compound of tyre than everyone else, of course, for good reason. He's got fewer laps to complete on these tyres if he has changed the tyres in the pits. And it's Alex Smith with still the outright fastest lap of this race. Meanwhile, the battle between Andy Craker and Matt Daly hasn't come to fruition. These two seems to be lapping fairly consistently. Andy Craker slightly faster than Matt Daly at this stage, with Andy Craker leading this race for a little while now. Matt Daly running in P2. Paul Milman, meanwhile, in P4. Jack Otten P5. Been a good race overall for Steve Knight in the end, running in P6 at this point in time, ahead of Alan Thomas. Alan Thomas, who's not been able to recover too much from this race after a slightly tumultuous start, if you will. And he continues on in P7, still a couple of points to take away from that to add to his repertoire of 10 at the moment. So obviously that P5 doing him wonders in the championship at least, which is good to see. Always good. You're not expecting in your first couple of seasons to be going out there and taking race win after race win. But to be running in the mid-pack and having the odd positive weekend here or there is a great start. And especially if Alan, as we know, is putting the investment into a sim rig that we know. I suspect we could be seeing more of him in the future. Especially, he'll have to drive something. He's got the Miso with the ropey gearbox. He's got the M32 gearbox in his car. He'll need to drive something because in between getting his synchros completely changed out. Of course, he can just fire back at me and tell me that I hope I enjoy driving my car in the cold, because the answer to that is no, because it's a multi-air. So his gearbox doesn't work and my engine doesn't work if it's too cold. So swings and roundabouts. As we see currently, I'm breaking the streaming setup, as you can see. It's all gone completely wrong at the final stage of this race, but it hasn't, though, for Andy Craker lapping in P1 at this point in time. Actually has some lapped traffic for some company. I suspect actually Alan Thomas, that is Alan Thomas, ahead of Rob Whitney at the moment. Very astute of him to try and let Andy Craker by without too much trouble there. Slowed down a little bit too much for that part of the track, I would say. Could have potentially caused a hazard, but still good that he's checking his rearview mirrors. No obligation to do so, of course. Just nice common courtesy. As Matt Daly runs in P2 at the moment. We've actually got two number one drivers in this session, it's just occurred to me. The FAA usually frown upon that type of thing. Luckily, we're not sanctioned by the FAA, so we can run whatever numbers we want, and also not everything is going to be a street circuit. So everyone wins, as we have scene now. The timer hits 0, and now we are currently running on the penultimate lap of this race. So it's going to be Andy Craig heading around that final corner once again to start what is now the final lap of race 2 here at Istanbul Park. This historic, I say historic like it's been around for 50 years. It's more of a mid-2000s F1 fan sort of deal. Really is Istanbul Park, and it delivered then. It delivered in the COVID pandemic as well. It's a great track. Such a shame that it isn't looking like it's going to be a regular fixture, as we see. Alex Smith, I wondered whether or not he'd taken all the pace out of those tyres. It doesn't seem to be the case, because he's just gone purple through Sector 2 as he gets ready to start his final lap of the race now. And of course not able to catch up with Matt Daly, but certainly able to dispatch of the likes of Paul Millman there, who's been lapping a very nice mid-pack race in the end. A potential podium, wasn't to be in the end, unfortunately, for him. Likewise, Jack Hodson, some good points, actually, which will be a good boon to his points haul so far. Likewise, Steve Knight as well, currently 9 points to his name. Some more points to be taken away from this race as well. A positive race all around then for actually quite a few drivers in this championship. It's very much a race of two tails, really. There's been some overall general positives for a few, and then there's been just 2 or 3 drivers where the race has been a complete disaster. The likes of Alan Thomas, Rob Whitney, Will Inglis, and Colin Keneath, of course, this weekend. Weekend to forget. As we see Andy Craig heads around that final corner for one last time this race weekend and takes the race 2 victory. Congratulations, Andy, for a fantastic drive. And there is Matt Daly, another P2 for Matt Daly here at Istanbul Park, and he comes home with some more points under his belt. Then we have a little wait before we have Alex Smith coming home. It wasn't to be another race victory in his end, so his race winning streak of 3 races comes to an end. But it's still a podium. So his podium streak continues on, at least, as he comes across the line in the pits. By the looks of things, that's what he's opted to do. Will it actually count him as a race finish? It will. We've seen Michael Schumacher try that in the past, and Alex Smith now tries it as well. So that is Alex Smith rounding out the podium here at Istanbul Park. Next, it will be Paul Millman. Great drive for him, as we've mentioned. Potential podium wasn't to be in the end, but the reverse grid race doing him wonders at the start, and he's been able to demonstrate he's certainly got that on merit as well. Some great pace and great consistency as well. Paul Millman coming home P4. Then next it will be Jack Hodson. Jack Hodson, a complete reverse in fortunes for his race 1, of course. Been a much more smooth running here in race 2. As he heads around that final corner just ahead of Steve Knight. He will be coming home P5, of course, Will Jack. Steve Knight comes home P6 in, I know it's a default livery for the car, but that shade of pink/purple is lovely, and the car really stands out. As he comes home in P6, does Steve Knight. Alan Thomas will be coming home in P7, celebrates by completely ending his tyres as we begin the first of our victory donuts, ladies and gentlemen. As we see Andy Craig actually not taking part, neither is Matt Daly, neither is Alex Smith. I am so disappointed, guys. What's happened to our victory donuts? Thank you, Alan, for continuing on the tradition, as no one else seems interested. This is a vital and pivotal part of the racing action each and every Wednesday, and I'm glad to see that some of us are still doing it. As we see Steve Knight has parked the car on the inside of the track there, as Alan Thomas is putting on a proper smoke show here. Doesn't matter, we've only got 1 car, because it's almost as if we got 3. As that will bring an end to this evening's racing. I hope you've enjoyed watching as much as I've enjoyed commentating. I will catch you next week for next week's touring car action, and in a fortnight's time for the next bit of single-seater action. So from me, it is a good evening, and thank you very much for watching.